Scott, pretend I don't know you. Tell me your name, how old you are, and what have you spent the last few decades doing?
Good. Scott Allen Wadsworth. I am 65 years old, going to be 66 before you know it. And I have, since I was 19, spent my working life logging, carpentry, welding, construction generally, playing Dixieland jazz, and blacksmithing.
You seem to be a pretty content person who works really hard, and you seem very content, and you have a state of joy at this stage in your life. Has it always been that way? I want to kind of hear about some of the perspective now versus in your 20s, and maybe some of the mistakes or things you wish you would have done a little bit differently. But to preface that, yeah, do you feel like you've always had that level of contentment that you do at this stage in life?
So yes and no. We had a single blue-collar income household for most of the time raising our 4 kids. And so I spent quite a lot of time stressed about the wolf at the door, okay? Some pressure and some stress and the expectation of bringing home something every week, kind of a hunter-gatherer existence. Go out and kill something and bring it home every darn day if you're going to eat. And so to your excellent question, I've thought off and on, I don't know how many times, plenty of times in my life I've stopped and thought, wait, am I happy? Am I feeling joy? Because in my worldview, joy is what we are created to experience. And so I would sort of, under the broad general category of being self-aware, ask myself, is this what joy feels like? And so I was not nearly as relaxed as a younger man as you see me now, as an old man who now has shifted to full-time YouTube. But even though there was pressure and tension and expectation, primarily because of my worldview, which includes the reality of God, and the wonderful choice I made of marrying Kelly Baldwin. Kelly Comerford was the way I met her. The fabulous partner she's been. I have to say that joy and peace in the midst of the pressures of life was sort of the default position. Not every day, but most days.
Yeah. Do you feel like any of that pressure could have been avoided? Not the pressure itself, but your stressful response to the pressure. Do you feel like you could have avoided that better?
See, that's a great question. My stressful response to the pressure. That's one of the things that has been a challenge for my wife, is that I get so preoccupied when there's pressure, when there's expectation for me. I tend to just distance myself from the here and the now and spend my time thinking about how do I keep these plates spinning and what plates are about to hit the ground. Too much. I do obsess over that. I have often wondered if that would have been less prevalent, if the income would have been higher. But I went into the construction workforce in 1977. And then, unlike now, carpenters were thick on the ground. There was no imaginable shortage of carpenters. No one could comprehend a time when carpenters would not have been on every corner looking for work. And so that drove the wages down, and so it was a hand-to-mouth existence for a long time. And so joy happened in spite of the pressure that I overreacted to.
Interesting. You went into carpentry and the trades at a time when there was an abundance and nowhere near a shortage. Now, it's almost a 180. It's an opposite. Do you regret going in the trades, or even in that moment, did you think, should I have done something else that made some more money? Could I have done better by my family?
Oh boy. So you really put your finger on maybe the primary source of, I want to say confusion, I want to say regret, Or how about the time I spent thinking about the road not taken? Because your kids don't care if you're fulfilled in your work. Your kids could care less. And to a certain extent, your wife's not all that interested in it either. They just require some stability. They require stability. And construction was so feast and famine. I mean, in the summertime, you worked more hours than your body could sustain. And in periods of economic upswing, you could work yourself to death. The 8 years that I lived in Las Vegas, I moved down there for work, and brother, Las Vegas had work. I could have worked 24/7, and what a stress reducer that was. I can make all the money that I am strong enough to make. So the period of time in Las Vegas was a period of time when financial stress was less. But I always wondered and regretted, and even today, even with the outcome that I've experienced at the end of a blue-collar career, I ask myself, why didn't I stay in school? Why didn't I get a credential? And there were plenty of years when I had to go out and hunt for work in times of recession, recession, when work became scarce, and I was walking up onto job sites and sticking out my hand and saying, "Hi, I'm Scott Wadsworth, and I can do anything you need done, and I need a job." When I got in the truck and drove to the next job, I would think, why didn't I get why am I not an engineer? Why am I not a psychologist? Why am I not, I don't know, fill in the blank. The grass is always greener, and so that regret is less now because of the cumulative effect of almost 50 years of work that I see has its own value. But when I was in the trenches, and when it was hard to buy a new pair of shoes for the kids, never mind for myself or my wife, I thought, blew it, missed the bus, should have stayed in school.
Interesting. Tell me more about that. Do you think you might have missed out on what you have got to experience with carpentry and blacksmithing and all that? Is it really a regret not pursuing higher education?
It was a regret when I was struggling to meet my financial obligations. And now that I'm not, I'm older, my kids are all self-sufficient, doing wonderfully. By the way, I didn't turn any of my boys into carpenters. I deliberately did not turn them into carpenters. They have chided me for that a little bit. But so the regret aspect has faded now that I can see the second tier benefits of blue collar, practical, productive problem solving for people, which is what you do when you work blue collar. You take people's practical problems and solve them. And particularly the 25 years I spent as a general contractor, there was so much satisfaction in helping people understand what they were visualizing, helping them understand how much that was going to cost, adjusting their expectations in order to provide a price that they could accept, and then exceeding those expectations and coming back as a friend later and spending time in the space that you built, or engaging with those satisfied customers over time was a compensation that I didn't understand was coming when I was paying my dues to learn those crafts. And so as that increased and the number of friends that I had made through the work that I had done increased, it was a compensatory reward for not having been white collar, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. So you spent most of your years, most of your career self-employed, right?
Yeah. Moved back down here after Kelly got her veterinary technician credential. We moved back to Douglas County. I built a portable sawmill. I ran that. I thought that was going to be a real strong self-employment picture. That kind of, and in conjunction with that, I thought I was qualified to build garages and decks for people, so I got a general contractor's license, and I was 21, 22, 23. The economy here crashed. Kelly and I and Amanda, and Kelly pregnant, not telling any of our parents, moved to Wyoming when the economy here at 23% unemployment was dead. Had to follow work. It's a quintessential carpenter story, that if there's no work where you are, you move to where there is work. And so we moved to Wyoming. It was still thriving. I went to work for Wade Welch, and I learned how to build homes from him. He was so good. He was so good. And so I was his employee for about 5 years there. And then the Wyoming economy tanked. And so we moved to Las Vegas, and employment was everywhere there. So that boom and bust cycle, I've kind of veered from your question, I think. But it was that cycle and the pressure of, man, this is what life is consisting of for me, that at times had me disillusioned. I would hear people talk the book Shop Class as Soul Craft. Ken Jordan and I used to sort of argue a little bit, because I would say, Kenny, the uncertainty of the compensation, the peaks and valleys in your income outweigh the zen and the satisfaction of craft. But that was when I was in the middle of beating the wolf back off the doorstep. And as that lessened and the other aspects grew, and I'm repeating myself now, that dissatisfaction with blue collar subsided. And now that blue collar work is in demand and is much more properly compensated than it used to be, I can look people right in the eye and say, you know, son, the trades are a viable way to go, and I will encourage you to do that if university is not for you.
So in my world, in my perspective, I think I see a lot of people over glorify self-employment.
Right.
Getting to be your own boss, and you already know what I'm getting at.
Yep.
And then what would you say to somebody, you know, who thinks that the grass is greener on the side of self-employment, specifically when it comes to work-life balance and your time? And is there anything you would have, because you've seen both sides of the coin.
I have.
You've had jobs that
I
were more
have.
stable, and you've had jobs that were seasonal, and
Yes.
you've worked for yourself, which
Yes.
is all over. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently in terms of work-life balance?
So, yeah, work-life balance.
And what is there a better one?
See, I never heard that phrase. It's so we have been busy in the United States for the past 20 years making up new words to describe a changing social environment that I don't think has entirely changed accidentally or organically. I think there's been some contrived change. And language is the first thing that drives contrived change, right? That's another topic. But work-life balance, I had never heard that expressed. All I knew is what I had seen my dad do, which was work all the time as it was needed. But my church life emphasized the cosmic significance of family, and families being something that ideally are eternal, and that you only get one chance to give your children your time, and time is what your children want. And so young dads then and now are thrown into this double bind of, I have to be home to spend these formative years with my kids, and I have to be somewhere else making the money that those kids need to have stability. So now, from the perspective of an old man watching my kids raise grandkids, I say, yeah, there's no hard, fast rule. Sometimes the obligation to be with your family trumps everything else. And sometimes the obligation to go out, darn it, and kill something and bring it home so they can eat it trumps everything else. And what it takes is situational awareness. In the same way that it takes situational awareness on the job to stay alive and stay unhurt, it takes situational awareness of always evaluating, how am I doing with this work-life balance? Because life requires work.
What is your North Star? How do you gauge that with situational awareness? Is there anything you ask yourself?
See,
or people
great question. So one part of that North Star is asking my wife, or being able to listen to my wife when she says, hey, you know, you haven't been home much lately. Boom, accept that. Instead of saying, well, you don't have any idea what the demands are at work, say, okay, let me think about that. And more importantly, let me pray about that. And so let me just throw out there that in my world, praying is not just something that happens in a position of prayer in a quiet time. There are prayers that are most profoundly answered to me in mid-stride. You know, walking across a job site or to the truck or driving, boom, I'll get this clear insight into what my situation actually is. Now, it's not always that. Sometimes there's long stretches where I just flounder, but kind of being hungry for, and the advice of friends. I have gotten great advice from friends about find somebody you trust who's older and say, look, how do you think I'm doing here? When they know how you're apportioning your time, and they maybe have an old man's regret of not having spent more time with their family. Or maybe they have an old man's regret of having not worked harder, and use their wisdom to sort of help become more objectively informed about what your situation is. So, first North Star was my bride, okay? Because she was often more in tune to what the reality was than what I was.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer. Going back to your 20s, your 30s, do you feel like you took enough risk or too much risk?
Great question. Risk. We are a risk-adverse society, right? And in some ways, in the physicality of my work, I took too much risk. But I feel like I was kind of sheltered or protected or something. I've never broken a bone more serious than a toe or a rib, okay? And the only days I ever missed of work were because I was home throwing up. And probably only single digits of that. Never missed a day for being hurt. I'm so thankful. But there are other types of risk. I'll tell you one risk I didn't take that I wish I would have taken. For a long time, I wish I would have taken it. And now, from the position of sitting in this wonderful blacksmith shop, smelling coal smoke and having a conversation with my friend, I see now that it's probably a good thing I didn't take this chance, but we had sold our first or second house in Las Vegas. And I had a little handful of money. And at the time, it seemed like a lot of money. And I had a conversation with a friend who values education. I said, David Day is his name. What a great friend he's been to me. What a source of wisdom he's been to me. Dave, I'm thinking I could take this money and go back to college, or I could take this money and buy another lot and build another house. What should I do? Go back to school, Scott. Get more knowledge. It's the only thing you take with you when you die. And that was one of his rationales. But I couldn't take the risk, as I saw it, of moving my family to another university town and putting us in an apartment and getting that toehold and then taking that nest egg and funding an education. That was a risk I should have taken and didn't. A risk I took and shouldn't have was when I moved up here from Las Vegas with a house down there for sale but unsold. And then we were stuck up here for months waiting for that house to sell. And then I got into a real estate bind with a falling market. So that was a type of risk that bit me. But on balance, I think I chose about the right middle ground between staying with a steady job, which I had, and moving or not moving. I guess I took about the right amount of risk, except risking the time and the money to go back and gain more knowledge, I guess.
It sounds like you're pretty content with that. You're pretty happy with the level of risk. So we're talking about this on a grander scheme in the perspective of life. I think it's funny. I kind of laugh, when I think about some of the things I've seen you do with a skill saw, or up on a roof, or up on a ladder. And I'm amazed that you haven't been seriously hurt. I think you should be. You're right to be grateful for it.
Yeah.
Do you think even with the fact that you're still okay, that you might have taken some too many physical risks, or no? Or are you okay with that?
It's funny, Brady, but The things I do with a skill saw and on a roof don't even feel like taking a chance to me. And when people beat me about the head and shoulders for demonstrating unsafe practices without fall protection and that sort of thing, in my heart I go, wait a minute, if I would have thought it was a risk, I would have protected myself. Now, as a young man, I think if I would have made videos of myself when I was young, I think it probably would have been horrifying. I think it would have been horrifying. I stacked a roof one time at 2 a.m. under a full moon because I couldn't sleep, and I looked outside and I knew I had the trusses scattered on the top plate on this tract where I was stacking roofs. Crystal Bay, I think, was a tract in Las Vegas. I stacked 164 houses in that tract in 1 year. One tract, 1 year, and I woke up and I knew that there was 5 or 6 houses loaded, and I knew that I needed to keep up with it or they'd bring in another stacking crew. I was doing piecework framing.
Yeah.
So I thought, I can stack this by moonlight.
Yeah.
Now that was dumb.
Yeah.
And there have been other things I did that I wouldn't do now. So the risk of injury, it was never on my radar much. Should have been more. But to answer your question, the big risks that we take are the risks with the habits that we condemn, the addictions that we may condemn ourselves to, the way we drive our automobiles, the risks we take with our marriage relationships, and the risks we take by neglecting our children. Those are the real risks, because darn it, we're all going to die anyway. But we don't have to die with broken relationships and the other things, and addictions and bad habits and personality traits that we let run amok. To me, those are the risks that we take unwittingly that have the most serious long-term consequences. There are worse things than dying. And maybe one of those is being a quadriplegic in a wheelchair. Yeah, maybe. But I don't know. We take risks without thinking and think too much about some of the risks that maybe are not that consequential, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. What are some of the things you were fearful of or afraid of in your 20s that you think are silly now, in contrast with some of your fears or concerns in your 60s?
I was so fearful and obsessed with the prospect of financial embarrassment. I got that from my dad. He was so focused on never being late with a payment, and I know now it was just the fear of that public humiliation. And so I was just obsessed with resisting anything that would tend to put me in a situation where I was late on a payment or had to call a creditor and say, could you wait a month? I realized now that was dumb. That was just dumb. I didn't need to take that fear so far inside of me that my stress drove my wife crazy. I've realized that the anxiety I would feel about what will become of me, what will become of us, I didn't have to be so stirred up about that, because there's always going to be a way to work your way forward. Now, clearly, sometimes people run into things from which there is no way to work their way forward. But generally speaking, just have some confidence that you, your family, with God's help, with the help of the network of friends and mentors, if you have any, are going to find a way to solve your problems. And I realized that I kind of was a winner in the lottery of the birth canal, right? Where I came to life, and my parents, 2 steady parents, struggling, poverty, one would say, but steady, and so many young men don't have that. But I guess to your question about the fears I had that I see now were silly, yeah, I see now I didn't have to be so afraid of the perceived financial embarrassment of not being responsible every single time. I was also, it was silly to have elevated the capacity of others. I thought everybody was pretty much perfect at everything they did, particularly the older guys. I thought, man, they really know stuff. Now I realize everybody's winging it. Everybody's faking it moment by moment and just making their best judgment call in the moment with whatever experience they have. But everybody is pretty much as uncertain as I was. I didn't get that. I wish I would have. I also wish that I could have listened more, with more comprehension, to some of the advice that people would give me. But let's dumb it way down. As a 16-year-old, when people would tell me not to drive too fast, I would think, yeah, I know, you shouldn't drive too fast. But I didn't realize that there's a point when your inertia, your momentum in your automobile overpowers the friction of the tires on the highway. And when the forces you've unleashed with speed overpower the gription of the rubber on the asphalt, you're going to have a wreck that you may or may not live through.
Yeah.
But as a young man, I would kind of gloss and not try for comprehension on some of the advice that came. Maybe that was just the folly of youth, but I think maybe I was too overconfident in some of those things, as evidenced by the chances that I still take with a skill saw or with a ladder.
Yeah.
So that fine line between confidence and overconfidence, I didn't always get it right.
Would you say that you're someone who do you care about what people think about you?
Too much. There was a silliness.
Still to this day?
Still to this day, I hate to let people down. It made me a good contractor, and it made it really hard to ever make any money. Okay? I do like to please other people and exceed their expectations. It was kind of a revelation to me one day when I realized, wait, some of these people just don't care if what they do satisfies anybody else, including their boss. So, yeah, I'm too much a people pleaser. Too much. But I'm better than I used to be. But the flip side of that is it makes you a person who can accomplish some good things if you take into account what other people's expectations are. And it also can make you psychotic.
What about the people? What about the people that you don't work for? The people that, for lack of a better term, that don't matter, that are outside your sphere of influence, that don't have a say on your life or what you do. Do you care about their opinions? Of the image
Some.
that you give off?
Okay, so that introduces a whole deal about this whole YouTube experience now. That number of people outside of my life whose opinion either makes a difference to me or doesn't is a much smaller number now than it used to be. And the comments, I read them. And yeah, there's trolls. There will always be trolls. There are also well-considered critical comments that I read and I'll go, man, you're right, you are right, you are right. And so maybe I've learned more about this because of that than I would have known 7 years ago before this all hit the fan.
It hit the fan in the beginning.
Yeah. But to your point also speaks to community and a collective understanding of us as humanity, right? And yeah, the reality that the people in Gaza right now, they don't know me, they don't know anything about me, but now I know some things about them that hurt my heart, and the people in Jerusalem, and in Tel Aviv, and it hurts my heart. And there's no impact I can have there except to sit by on the sidelines and thank God that I'm not there. But those people, if we knew them, would have perspectives on my life if they knew me that would either be useful or not, and they would instantly become someone that I would like to have a role in making their circumstance better if I could. Or not everything's altruism. Sometimes you want to please people because doggone it pays. And so, okay, that's not Christianity.
Yeah.
That's just business. Quid pro quo is not. There's nothing good about that. That's just self-interest.
Yeah.
But not every impulse to please other people is self-interest, even though there can be a self-interest component that may come around later. I think we can train ourselves to be more concerned in a wholesome way about what other people think, and I think more of us ought to learn that.
It seems like you're pretty content with that. You have a pretty good grasp on, pretty good balance on whose opinion you give weight to and who you don't.
I hope so.
Do you feel like you asked for enough help in the early days? It seemed like you put yourself in positions where you had really awesome learning opportunities and you sought mentorship. It seems to be the case, at least. Do you feel like you wish you would have asked for help more often, or asked how to do things more often, or just grind it out yourself?
It's never been hard for me to ask for knowledge or information. That's never been hard. But it has been too hard. My pride, right? Pride in the sense that's not good. Okay, now the meaning of pride has shifted over the years. It's one of those words whose meaning we have intentionally or accidentally allowed to shift. That pride, at least in the scriptural context, is always a sin. But, you know, the few, the proud, the Marines, integrity, self-reliance, standing up for a cause in the context of pride, there's positive aspects to that. But I've been overburdened with it in the ego sense as a younger man. And so asking for knowledge or information, never a problem with that. But asking for help, I was too slow to do that. I was too slow to pick up the phone and say, hey, could you come over and help me with this thing? I would always try to lift it myself. That's not that smart.
Yeah. I feel like I think I know the answer to this. Maybe I don't. What does hard work mean to you?
What does hard work mean to me? So on the face of it, in fact, there was a comment, I don't know, it was on a video we made about the drywallers and the guys stocking drywall and how hard they work and how respectable that is, you know. And there was a comment that said, man, I wish you wouldn't just equate hard work with sweat and labor. And it would be, I can see why that fellow would think that that's what I was doing, but I don't do that. I have doctor friends who work harder than anybody I know, okay? They take burdens, they take burdens, real burdens that other people have, and they try to help them with it, and they weep when their treatment fails. Our structural engineer on the spec house, Dave Thomas, died of COVID. I know his doctor. His doctor and he were good friends, and his doctor wept. And so think about the work that a good doctor does who really engages with his patients. That's hard work. There's all kinds of hard work. There are people at a keyboard. I watch my son-in-law, Ben, who is, sorry, Ben, Ben's a cream puff on the job. He's just so tender physically, right? But man, that guy can work at a computer console. I mean, work, fully engaged, fully occupied, drawing the information that he's accumulated and solving problems. And so I recognize that as hard work. But in general, you know, by the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat thy bread is not a curse. That was not a punishment that came in that story. That was a lifeline for us. That if we don't have if life doesn't demand that we exert ourselves somehow, we run amok. We get into trouble. Our creative impulse leads us into damaging and corrosive habits and places and acquaintances. And so hard work in whatever form it comes, I think, is a key to living a fulfilled life.
Do you feel like in your 20s and 30s, the hard work was ever too much, or was it throttled? What I'm really getting at is, do you feel like you did a good job with all that hard work of planning for the future?
No.
That's a quick response.
No, I didn't. But I almost couldn't. Because, I mean, financial planning is really the things that, well, two things come to my mind right now. The planning that would be implied in taking care of your body, so your body continues to function well, and the planning that's implied in setting aside some of what you make for your future needs. A single blue-collar income, I can look anybody in the eye and say, you know what, it was just not possible to save any money, so I instead, in order to build up some sort of net worth, I would buy houses, fix them up and sell them, and try to plow that increase of equity into another project, so that net worth was increasing as a function of a real estate program. Because Kelly and I could never siphon enough money to ever cover any ground straight out of the paycheck to save. And someone listening to this, maybe Dave Ramsey listens to this, and he'd say, well, Scott, that's just not true. There was something there you could have. Yeah, maybe, Dave. Maybe. But so the planning for the future, I always had this unreasonable self-confidence that, no, I'll always be able to produce what I need. There will always be something out there that I can go out and kill and drag home. I didn't need to plant and cultivate and harvest and replant. The difference between an agrarian, the shift from hunter-gatherer to agrarian human experience was a big deal that made cities and specialization of labor and all of that possible. I was a born hunter-gatherer. And so I just thought I was smart enough and strong enough to deal with whatever came, and I didn't spend enough time thinking about the future. And yet here it is, the future's here, and yeah, we're all right. So, yeah. But the answer to your question was no.
Okay. For someone, maybe in hopes to inspire someone who's in their 20s and 30s, and maybe they are paycheck to paycheck, or they're looking at the next 20 years and they think, man, this is going to be a grind for at least the next 20, 40 years. What matters to you now? What are your priorities right now that maybe would have inspired younger Scott? Or that you could have had priority back then?
I almost don't know what to tell him. Because if it would not have been for this YouTube career change, and I don't want anybody to think that YouTube is retirement. It is the furthest thing from retirement. YouTube is an iron mistress, okay? Iron. So it's work. So what I would tell him is that you think what you're doing is going out and working and bringing home the bacon. And maybe your bride is too. You think that what you're doing is solving the demands that just come with living and trying to plan for the future, but what you're actually doing is forging who it is that you are. That's what's really going on. And we need to pay more attention to that, to what it is that we are doing with our discretionary time, what it is that we love so much that nothing can stop us from doing it, and then try to be wise enough to project that into the future. Gosh, if I'm still investing this much of me in that, what kind of a mark is that going to leave on me when I'm an old man? I don't know if that's too theoretical to be useful, but I guess what I would tell the 20-year-old guys is expect that you're going to have to work. If you don't have to work, then frankly, there's no way you're going to turn into the human. You're not going to develop all your potential if you don't have to work at maintaining, advancing, protecting, teaching, enlightening your people. If you don't have to work at that, if it's not exhausting you, try harder.
You think escaping work is a myth?
Escaping work is a myth.
I would think that.
It's absolutely a myth. And if the unthinkable happens and you win the lottery, prepare for your life to be wrecked. Do you ever read about anybody that wins a lottery and has a happy ever after story? What they have is people coming out of the woods and they make bad investments and they pick up new habits and they blow it on stupid cars and 20 years later, most of them are dead or back in the gutter or just profoundly unhappy with their relationships, shattered. Now, that's an overgeneralization. I get that. But there are plenty of those stories. There are enough of those stories for us to realize, there must be something in having to work that can save us as humans and families, and something about being able to kick back and prop your feet up that accelerates corrosion. At least that's what I think. And after 65 years, it's what I think I've seen.
The last thing I want to ask you is, what do you think the next generation, my generation, needs most?
I think what your generation needs most is to understand that they shouldn't give up on the idea of being happily married for a lifetime. They shouldn't give up on the idea that the regulation of our sexuality is something that can account for all of our joy and all of our misery. Overstatement, but they shouldn't give up on the idea. So a conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative with all the baggage that has, because there's plenty of recrimination and blame and short-sightedness on both ends of the political spectrum. But a conservative understanding of culture and what it takes to thrive as families and people is not the worship of ashes. It's the preservation of fire. That's not my quote, and I can't attribute it, but it's so powerful. That there is some wisdom in the way that people have historically tried to order their lives. Tried and failed, tried and succeeded. There's wisdom in the way that cultures have emerged and persisted that your generation has to be able to think about carefully and access and regain. Or it's just going to be chaos. And all these questions about life-work balance and fulfillment will be burned up. Now, there's probably a lot more to say on that, but maybe I've already said enough. And at the bottom of it, your generation needs to understand that to believe in a Darwinist explanation, neo-Darwinist explanation for existence with all the beauty and all the variety and intelligence and order emerging by chance from chaos is to believe in something that is impossible. And to believe that all the beauty and the order and all of the incredible complexity and sophistication of reality has emerged because of intelligent design and the transmission of information over time and elegant engineering, and I will tell you it's all done by God. To believe in that is to believe in something unprovable. But of the choice between believing in something impossible and something unprovable, I think believing in something improvable is a stronger logical position. And I just hope that your generation can wrap its arms around that.
I like that. Wrap its arms around it, not our heads around it. It's a matter of the heart, not of the head.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Brady.